Good afternoon, I'm Bridget Taylor and this is Currency Wars. Today I'm joined by Jan Sluis-Cremer, he's from RMB, Cilliers from TreasuryOne and Luke Alers from Kaon Capital. Let's have a quick look and see what's happening in the markets. All eyes are on Jackson Hole and the upcoming speech from Janet Yellen. She's the Federal Reserve's chair. This is after recent hawkish comments from other Federal Reserve's officials, which spurred expectations for a US hike this year and has increased that percentage to a 54% probability. Markets initially rallied after these hawkish comments, but underlying weakness emanating from Europe, specifically over concerns related to the Italian banking sector, have muted the rally. The UK remains robust, this post the Brexit, with data showing that the UK remains resilient. Meanwhile, the Rand this week was hardest hit and the hardest hit emerging market after news that the Hawks had scheduled a meeting with Pravin Gordhan and some of his SARS executives. Gordhan, meanwhile, has declined to attend the meeting as he's been advised that he is not a suspect in the Hawks investigation. In his words, "I have a job to do in a difficult economic environment, and I must serve South Africa the best I can. Let me do my job." The Rand has lost almost R1 as a result of these allegations and remains tentative ahead of the Fed announcement tomorrow. Okay guys, so now that we know what's happening in the markets, let's not going to focus too much on Europe and the UK, but let's really talk about, I'm going to start off with Wyoming, Jackson Hole, that's a big one, that's tomorrow. A lot of increase in terms of speculation. So those numbers have gone up from 24%, they went up to about 36%, and then we had all those hawkish comments last week, Andre, that saw the Rand come off slightly from the previous levels, and the speculation that now in fact Janet Yellen will be quite hawkish tomorrow.
Yes, I think that's the reason why we saw the 1350s last week. But I think when we actually get the comments from her, she's still going to very much focus on data dependent, see how it gels out, and the 54% will just go back down to the 45% or the 40%, and we will not see an interest rate increase in September. She will not be as hawkish as we think that she is. She'll remain data dependent as she's been over the last period.
But we need some clarity. I mean, if we look at the bond industry globally, I mean, you look at the likes of PIMCO, you look at the likes of BlackRock, etc., the guys that hold a lot of bonds, I mean, that's trillions and trillions of dollars. We're in a negative growth environment. We're in a negative interest rate environment almost everywhere. We really do need some clarity tomorrow. What are you going to be looking for specifically, Jan?
Yeah, look, I definitely think we do need some clarity. And also what doesn't help is you got the deputy chairman of the vice chairman of the Fed saying one thing, Janet Yellen says another, then one of the other Fed presidents from the New York Federal Reserve, he's also talking rate hike. You can't kind of have that, you know, for me, you must all be on the same page. We're either raising rates or we're not raising rates, or we're going to leave them where they are. Yeah. But you can't have that constant, one says one thing and somebody else says another thing. So I think that the big thing on everybody's focus tomorrow night or at the Jackson Hole thing is really going to be around what Janet Yellen has to say. And I've got to agree with Andre here that it still comes down to data dependency. It still comes down to what's happening elsewhere in the growth elsewhere in the world. You know, you've got the Eurozone in negative interest rates. You've got the UK just recently cut and threatening to cut again. You've got Japan in negative interest rates. You can't have then one side of the world upping rates when everybody else is going the other direction. So, you know, they've got to be careful. And I do think that Janet Yellen has to kind of be strong about it and go, this is what we're going to be looking at over the next 6 months, 8 months to a year. And stop this he said, she said the whole time, which just causes unnecessary panic in the financial markets. And we saw that last week with, you know, suddenly the Rand is looking like we could go to 12.80 Rand, and emerging markets are looking good across the board. And then suddenly you got these two guys who go and say completely the opposite to what Janet Yellen's been saying and what the Fed minutes have all said. And suddenly, you know, you find yourself back at the 12 Rand, at the 13.50 levels, and now everybody's, and as you say, the futures market's gone from a 10 or a 15% of a rate hike, now suddenly we're at 54%. It's like, really?
I think that we also in a market, Luca, maybe you can give us a bit of insight into this, is that people are clutching at straws. So there's very little bit of, if we look particularly in the bond market, such low volatility levels. Why? Because people don't know what to do. The only real news in the market right now is this Wyoming hole, and why, as Jan alluded to, you've got this division in the ranks within the Fed. Yes, the Fed minutes have made the statement with regards to why they're keeping rates on hold. However, this uncertainty, in my mind, is one, it's disrespectful to the federal chair, and it's disrespectful to the fact that we've got a huge bond market where there is a lot of public money that's invested. So I think from those perspectives, maybe you can just talk us through what kind of advice do you think Janet Yellen's getting, and what do you expect to come out tomorrow?
Well, I think the big thing is that, you know, there's going to be dissent. There are, you know, every sort of major sort of area in the US has a Fed sort of chairman, representative. And so they'll obviously have differing views, but I think what they need to do is have a consolidated view, obviously discuss things, but not have you know, one guy saying this, one guy saying this publicly. You know, it needs to be through the Fed meeting forum, and then they come out with a sort of consolidated view, taking all the views into account. That's the best way, and that's how the Fed is generally run. Like, you'll see the Fed minutes and see that, you know, there was dissent amongst certain individuals, but that's the thing. And I think the problem is what's happening is the US and the rest of the world are running on in different gears at the moment. And I think there's frustration amongst some people in the US, obviously the guys that are speaking out about what's happening and how they're addressing their growth trajectory versus the rest of the world. But I agree with both Jan and Andre. In terms of the final outcome, I think it's going to be a global view and what the US has to do in a global context. You know, and you know, the fact that the UK came out with much more aggressive monetary easing than was expected, even though the pound has sort of retraced its sort of weakness. With Japan, the US has its hands tied a little bit at the moment. Before, I think the global economy needs to show signs of turning around before the US really acts.
And they also don't want to take advantage of a relatively newly recovered patient. So let's move our eyes back to South Africa, because that's really been the big news this week. I mean, I feel like we're back in December, we're living Nenegate again. Shock, horror. So you're hearing one side of the story where the issues regarding questions that were raised to Mr. Gordhan in May were addressed. We were all told that he addressed the questions, all 27 of them, replies were sent, and that led that to lie, and we saw the national elections, the municipal elections. But post that, there's been a massive scurry in the ANC, and we're now seeing this resurgence of chair of SOEs taking control of certain positions, and again the pressure on the Treasury. And it's a concern, because when you hear what Mr. Gordhan has now made in terms of his statement, he's talking about the fact that he categorically was told that he has not been put under suspicion. But then why create such a dilemma around it, Andre? So talk to me about how you feel about this, because this Rand move, in my mind, has been 100% as a result of the local political backdrop.
Absolutely, 100%. There's no ways that you can ascribe it to anything happening in the economy. Everything in the economy or in the world, anything was going smoothly. It was running well for South Africa, and we were on a right trajectory. Yeah. One of the producers outside actually gave a very nice analogy, and he said we're almost back into snakes and ladders here, and there's a few ladders that we climb through the economy on the economic side, and then there's just too many snakes out there. Yeah. And that's really what's happening. But very much the same as that's happening in the US with the Fed is happening here. It's being played out in the media. For Pete's sake, these things are not media related, and leave it in the hands of the media, they will escalate it to enormous proportions. It will be pulled into different directions to the detriment of the economy and the people. But especially
because it's such a sensitive issue, Andre. I mean, you know, we can talk about what happened last year, December. I mean, we're looking at a market that already saw such a significant sell-off based on what went down with the previous Minister Nene. The consequent placement of David van Rooyen and then the replacement of Pravin Gordhan was a dog show. We're in a situation where people said, please do not let this happen again. Yet we're back in the scenario. And the same evils are rearing their head. So if we look at the arguments around why is this playing out, why is this happening, things like the nuclear deal, things like S.A., these names are coming up again. Do you think that where there's smoke, there's fire, Jan? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm sure there's definitely where there's smoke, there's fire. You know, and it's the same topics that keep on rearing their head. It's the nuclear deal. I mean, and we've got to agree with the minister. A $1 trillion+ rand, it's unaffordable. You know, we got almost negative growth at the moment. Now you want to go and spend $1 trillion rand. How long can you carry on throwing money in a bottomless pit in SAA? And I think the problem is coming is there's guys who have hidden agendas and that are trying to drive this because there's all sorts of the possibilities of contracts and all the rest of it behind it, and they're not really in it for the better good of the country. And the minister's been trying really hard to curb spending and to stop all this, type of stuff happening.
Yeah.
And it's kind of almost now clutching at straws. And so let's deviate and go and create a negative thing around the finance minister, so that we can go and move on the sidelines.
I'm going to quickly close with you, Luke, before we move on to the big guns. Just give me an idea. I mean, that hashtag, I'm trying to do my job, or let me do my job, has been doing the rounds in the media. And it's quite interesting because ultimately, from your perspective, especially if we look at foreign investors, the role of Pravin Gordhan is pivotal in the South African economy. Just talk us quickly through what that means.
So he's the finance minister. He's a minister, so he's appointed by the ruling party. So he's not completely, independent, but he is a check against, the president just doing what he wants to do. And I think what's happened with the new committee that's being set up for procurement and the fact that the president needs to sign off on that committee is essentially sidestepping the finance minister's role completely. It's essentially saying, well, we're not going to say the finance minister decides what actually happens. We're going to go to the president. And I think that it's all possibly lining up together. You've got the Hawks, you've got this new committee that's been set up since the weekend in Lekgotla. I think that's what's happening. And the problem is that he's being sidelined, and the international community has been on a big roadshow about how he's going to keep South Africa on the straight and narrow. Yeah. If anything happens to him, I think we're in for a very, very bumpy ride.
I'm going to have to move us on to big guns, guys. So I'm going to put you on the block. Andre, do you want to start and give us your view with regards to, I know it's tough. I know there's a lot of moving parts, but just give us your view, maybe just talk about the risks and what you think we're going to see on the rand.
I think the risks is within the Gordhan fights. And until such time as we don't get a unity and united front on that side from government, we will have the volatility and the risk is to the upside in that case. But I would call for a trading range between 13.80 and 14.5.
Okay. Danny?
Yeah, look, I've got to very much agree with Andre's ranges there. I mean, it's all political and event risk driven at the moment. You can't plan for it. Doesn't matter how hard you try, you can't build it into any model of any type, shape or form. So risk is to the upside. It's now become a scenario of buy the dip, probably 75, 80 on the downside. Once we through 14.30, I think 14.60 comes into play, which is also your 100-day moving average. So yeah, kind of really try and stay away from the political event risk.
But know that it's there.
But know that it's there, and expect volatility and big swings.
Okay, thank you, Luke.
Yeah. No, look, unfortunately, I'm just going to say I agree. I agree. The ranges my range was also about 13.80, 14.50. I think if it breaks through to the 40.50 level, you could get up to 75. But what I would like to say is that I think if the Pravin Gordhan thing sort of blows over and sort of there's the government comes out with backing him, or there's more clarity around it and less sort of accusations, let's say, I think the rand could strengthen quite quickly on the back of that. I think the weakness has been as a result of that. As soon as that's resolved, you you could see the rand strengthen quite aggressively. So keep an eye on that.
Okay, thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it. So just in conclusion for the week, we are watching a lot of political risk. We've got two big announcements this week. We're obviously watching the fallout from the ministry's meeting with the Hawks, as well as Jackson Hole tomorrow night with Janet Yellen. Keep an eye on it. All our guests think that the risks are to the upside. Watch at 14:30, a break of that potentially up to 14:60. I'd like to thank my guests once again, Jan Sluis-Cremer from RMB, Cilliers, TreasuryOne, and Luke Alers from Kaon Capital. If you'd like to send any questions or comments, you're more than welcome to do so at Currency Wars 410 or myself at Kaon Capital for your personal response to the FX markets. Until next week, good luck in the trenches.